We read from John chapter 10, beginning with verse 1. And you know it's important because of the opening words. He says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. And when he has brought them all out, his own, he goes out before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers." This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep, and all who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep do not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and he will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy." Jesus says, "I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is the hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep but sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep." But Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must also bring them, and they will listen to my voice, so that there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because as I lay down my life, that I may take it up again." All right, now you and I get to take a look at John chapter 10. John chapter 10 this morning. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you wish that you could hear the voice of Jesus? You ever have that moment where you'd like to hear Jesus himself out loud? Hey, there's a couple of websites that you can go to online that have old recordings of famous people. There's a recording of Queen Victoria from 1889. You can hear Thomas Edison. You can hear all kinds of people from long ago, and to hear their voice, to hear what the tone of their voice is. That's cool. But it's really Jesus we'd want to hear, isn't it? Isn't that the voice that we'd like to hear? And it's not just curiosity. It's not just like, oh, I wonder what that sounded like. But there are times that we just would like to say, I wish that God would speak out loud to me. I wish that I could hear his voice. Jesus, speak it so that I can hear it. Anybody ever have one of those moments? If only I could hear Jesus speak. I mean, I do. I've been there. I think most of us have had those kinds of moments. If only I could hear the voice of Jesus. Maybe it's a decision that's in front of you. Maybe it's a big choice that you have to make. Maybe there's some doubt that you're dealing with that you'd like to be reassured with. Maybe it's some comfort in a hard time where you just hunger and ache for the fact that I wish that I could hear Jesus. Well, I have fantastic news for you. Jesus has come. Jesus has spoken, and we have his words. And so one of the things that we have is this blessing is I wish I could hear the voice of Jesus. I wish I could hear God speak. I wish he would speak to my life. I want you to know that he has come. He has spoken. And we have these words. And so between now and Easter, we are going to spend our time together listening to the voice of Jesus. Listening to the voice of Jesus as he speaks directly to our souls. We begin this morning taking a look at this passage in John chapter 10. We begin with the voice that Jesus introduces to us. The voice that Jesus says to us. In fact, he says, I am the good shepherd. In fact, he repeats that multiple times in this passage. He says, I am the good shepherd. And this is what he says. He says, my sheep hear my voice. My sheep know my voice. My sheep follow my voice. And so as we begin to think and try to wonder, what is it like to hear the voice of Jesus? Well, Jesus tells us that my voice is the voice of a shepherd. If you want to know what the voice of Jesus sounds like, it is the voice of a shepherd. Now, we're actually going to listen over the next few weeks because actually there are several different ways in which Jesus speaks to us. Sometimes it's a voice of compassion. There are sometimes that Jesus even speaks with a voice of humor. There are even some times that we're going to look at where Jesus speaks with a voice of anger. And when he speaks with a voice of anger, it's probably a good idea that we listen. But Jesus introduces his voice and says, if you want to hear my voice, if you want to know my voice, it is the voice of a shepherd. Shepherd. Do you have that? Did you write that down someplace? The voice of Jesus is the voice of a shepherd. I want you to know that. I want you to know that. I want you to know that. But now comes the more complicated part. So what does that mean? Jesus speaks to us as the voice of a shepherd, but okay, I got that. I wrote it down. I remembered it. I think I've got it. Well, what does it mean that Jesus speaks in the voice of a shepherd? Well, let's take a look at the passage together. I think he has some really wonderful things to tell us. Are you ready? The first thing is that the shepherd comes from a role of care and protection. That the shepherd comes from a role of care and protection. Now, it's kind of interesting, this whole passage, this whole section of the Gospel of John, this section here in John chapter 10, he is focused on the fact, he says, I am the good shepherd. He describes what a good shepherd is. He says, this is what a good shepherd looks like. This is what a trustworthy shepherd looks like. And then he says, that's me, in case you missed it. And according to the passage, some of the folks missed it. He says, so let me say it again to you, truly, truly, I am the good shepherd. And he describes all of that. But what's interesting, as he unfolds this passage, as he unfolds this teaching, he doesn't start with shepherds. When he starts this passage, he does not start with shepherds. He starts with thieves and robbers, crooks and bullies, strong men. Now, why is it that instead of just telling us about the life of the shepherd, why is it that Jesus multiple times leads into this conversation about shepherds by talking about thieves and robbers? Well, when you are vulnerable, and we are vulnerable people, I think it's part of the reason why the image of sheep is so often applied to us, is because we are vulnerable. And in this world, you and I are vulnerable. We fight really hard not to be vulnerable. But our fists up is a reminder that we're vulnerable, or else we wouldn't have our fists up so much. We are vulnerable. And in a vulnerable world, and in a vulnerable environment, we discover that we are surrounded by those who harm or by those who help. Those who harm or those who help. And one of the reminders that Jesus gives is just plain as day, particularly if you live in a sheep community, is there are lots of sources of harm. In fact, that's the whole reason why you need a shepherd. There would no be shepherding in a world that did not have vulnerability or harm. And so the reason that there is a shepherd is because there are thieves and robbers. And Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. What that means is he is not harm, but he is help. He is security. And because we live in an environment where we are surrounded by harm, we need a shepherd. And Jesus says, I will be your shepherd. I will be your source of care and protection. That's what the shepherd does. Is thieves and robbers or the good shepherd? Now, you actually think sometimes, well, I don't know whether the world can really be divided into just those two places. I don't know whether the world is just that A or B. Sometimes the world is more complicated, and Jesus says, you're right. It's not just thieves and robbers and shepherds. He says there's another category here, and it's the old Bible word is hirelings. The old word here is a hired hand. Now, he says there's thieves and robbers, and then there's a shepherd, and then you also have some folks that are a hired hand. Now, what this is first century gig economy. This is a rent-a-shepherd. This is a person who shepherds for Uber. This is a person who's got just a little bit of time on their hands and says, I need a little bit of extra cash on the side, and so what I'll do is that when I've got some free time, I will do the role of a shepherd. But they're not really a shepherd. They don't have in their heart that deep care and call for the care and protection of the sheep. In fact, Jesus says, listen, when you call 1-800-RENT-A-SHEPHERD, what you're going to get is someone who will show up until it's hard. You'll get someone who will show up, cash a check, unless an animal comes, unless danger presents itself. And in that case, if danger presents itself, that hired hand is gone because they were in it for their self-interest. And the danger means that their self-interest means I am out of here. And so you have some folks that look like shepherds. You have some folks that look like help. But they're not really there for your care and protection. They're there for themselves. And then Jesus really highlights this. He says the hired hand, when danger comes, they flee and they run away because they're not a shepherd. He says, but the shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And Jesus says, I am that shepherd. When danger comes, when hardship comes, when your life is vulnerable, Jesus says, I lay down my life for you. Because I am the good shepherd. I'm not a robber, I'm not a thief, and I'm not a hired hand. but I am that shepherd. The reason why Jesus sounds like a shepherd, why he has the voice of the shepherd, is because he comes from that role of care and protection. I would also tell you that the shepherd comes from a place of relationship. Here is the heart of what Jesus talks about in this passage. He talks about, here's the good shepherd, and yes, the shepherd is there for protection, and a hired hand runs away and doesn't want to be there and doesn't want to put themselves in harm's way. All of those things are important, but if you listen to this passage, if you read this passage several different times, what you hear is, even though it starts with protection, that's not the headline. The headline in this passage is that the shepherd comes from relationship. He says, I know the sheep, and the sheep know me. That's the heart of it, is the relationship. There is this marvel, there is this wonder, and it's present in sheeping communities, shepherding, where they have sheep and shepherds. It's still true today that you can have multiple flocks together, and the shepherd calls out in his voice, and his sheep will separate because they know his voice. That same shepherd can hear a sheep in harm, in pain, or in some difficulty, and he will know whether it's his sheep or not his sheep. The shepherd comes from a place of relationship. They know me, I know them. Anybody, you don't have to raise your hand for this. Probably best if you don't. Anybody talk to a fake person this week? Now, I don't mean somebody really, really shallow. I don't mean somebody who's a hypocrite or whatever you want to go there. What I mean is that you called 1-800. And you wanted to talk to a person about an issue that you were having, and what you ended up with was a robot. And it was a robot that tried to sound like a real person, but they weren't really fooling anybody. It was a fake voice, and you pushed numbers, and you tried to say words, and you did exactly what the robot wanted you to do. Maybe you didn't do that on the phone. Maybe you did that and you went, they told you, you know what, you can talk to somebody faster if you go online. And so you go online and you type into the little box, and guess who you're talking to there? The cousin of the robot. It's the same robot. And whatever information you tell them, then you finally get to talk to a real person. Guess what you get to do? Tell them all the same things that you already told the robot. I'm not sure how this is working. I like technology, but that is not it. Don't take this personally, okay? Don't take this personally. But companies are spending millions and millions and millions of dollars to never speak to you again. They would just as soon keep you as far away as they possibly can. But that's not the shepherd. That's not the shepherd. He knows your voice. He has come to be right there with you. He's there for the night. He's there for the day. He's there for the storm. He's there for the calm. He's there for the middle of it. The shepherd is present. It's what a shepherd does. There are no remote shepherds. There is no distant shepherding. There is no Zoom shepherding. Shepherding is relationship. It is being there. I want you to know that Jesus has the voice of a shepherd because he is about relationship. Think about some of the sources of that relationship. Jesus has relationship with you because he made you. He spoke our world into existence. He invented your DNA. He invented DNA. He even knows how to spell out what DNA stands for. He put it all together. In the beginning, he was already waiting. and He made it happen. Not only did He make this universe exist, but He knit you together in your mother's womb. He knows the freckles. He knows the hairs on your head. He knows the trigger points in your life. He knows everything about you because He made you. He knows us because He has that heart of a shepherd. Psalm 23 reminds us of the life of the shepherd. The shepherd is there for every part of life. The still waters. He is there for the green pastures. He's there when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. He is there when we are before our enemies. He is there when we look into the future and wonder what happens next. The Good Shepherd is there in all of those places. The Good Shepherd knows us because the whole reason that Jesus came is because God loved us. For God so loved, so intensely, so deeply, so widely loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, His one and only Son, that whosoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. The whole reason we have the Jesus story is because God loves you. He comes, the shepherd comes from a place of relationship. The shepherd knows you and He loves you. The shepherd knows you and He loves you. I would also tell you that the shepherd comes not just from a place of protection and care and not just from relationship, but He also comes for purpose. The shepherd comes for purpose. He comes for relationship and rescue and relationship. If we had a little bit more time, we would really break this down, but I want you to see this as you go back and reread this passage. I want you to listen to the progression between the sheep and the shepherd. But what I want you to listen for, and I want you to see it as you read it for yourself, the shepherd calls, the shepherd leads, the shepherd goes out before them. But then I also want you to see that there's a shift that occurs in these same verses. It says the shepherd calls, the shepherd leads, He goes before them. And then it says that they follow Him. That they follow Him. I want you to see the two-sidedness of this relationship. Yes, Jesus is the one that calls. Jesus is the one who knows them. Jesus is the one that opens the gate. Jesus is the one that stands in front of them and He leads them. But don't miss this. The sheep follow Him. And the sheep in time say, "That's my shepherd. That's my shepherd. That's my shepherd." Wherever He goes, whatever direction, whatever path, wherever He goes, I'm going with Him because that's my shepherd. And when the sheep follow the shepherd like that, it says, and then the sheep know His voice. They know Him. It is that relationship, but it is also the rescue. Woven through this passage is the reminder that Jesus lays down His life for the sheep. In fact, in verse 17 there He says, "The Father loves me because I voluntarily lay down my life." That's what we celebrated right here. Is Jesus not just showing up to be the kindest and friendliest person in history, but He comes to have His body broken and His blood poured out to rescue us. To rescue us. So what does this mean for us this morning? Well, there's a handful of takeaways that I want you to think about. One, I want you to be encouraged. I want you to be encouraged. I want you to be encouraged. You have a shepherd. You have the good shepherd. He loves you. He is here for your care and for your protection. And I want you to know that there may even be some moments and some circumstances when you feel alone. Man, life is hard. So much harder when we feel alone. I want you to be encouraged that you have a shepherd who loves you, cares for you, and protects you. Walk out of here today encouraged, refreshed, renewed, reminded you have a shepherd who loves you, cares for you, and is present in your life. I would also just challenge you to respond to that shepherd. He's calling. He's opening the door. He's leading in front. But will you renew your understanding that you say, that's my shepherd? That's my shepherd. Wherever he goes, I'm going. I'm going to follow him as he moves, as he leads, as he directs. I want to be as close to him as I can possibly be. I want to be the sheep that's as closest to the shepherd as I possibly can be. And not just in terms of your day-to-day activity, but also your heart. Would you love that shepherd with your whole heart, body, mind, soul, everything about you? Say, that's my shepherd. And then, most critically, if you've never begun to follow, if the shepherd has called, if the shepherd has opened the door, but for whatever reason, you're one of those sheep that's lost. We have lost sheep. If you're one of those sheep that for whatever reason just hasn't made that connection, hasn't heard that voice, has got stuck someplace where you have not responded to the call and the invitation of the shepherd, would you do that today? I never know. I never know what the heart and the experience of every person in the room is. I have a hard time trying to remember people's names without being able to look inside of a soul and say, oh, I know where this person is. I know what their journey is. I know what their story is. I don't know. But is it possible that you've been around Jesus? You've heard of Jesus? You've sung about Jesus? But you've never allowed him to rescue you. Something has stood in the way, and there's been a separation. He wants you to come. He wants you to follow. And maybe today is the day that you need to do that. And so it begins with a prayer, something like this. Jesus, I need that rescue. I need to be claimed. I need to be healed and forgiven. I need to be restored. I don't know everything that those words mean, but I know that where I am is not where I'm supposed to be and not where you want me to be. And so, God, if you call, I will follow. If you call me in this moment, I will follow. Amen. And if that's where you are today, the whole point of this is the voice of Jesus wants to be your shepherd. Will you follow? Jesus wants to be your shepherd. Will you let him rescue you?